Hi everyone, it's Nancy Crawshaw from the Extension team at Angus Australia and welcome to our final episode of Paddock Talk for 2025. This is a great chance for us to reflect on the year that's been as well as look ahead on what opportunities may be heading our way. We've really brought together some speakers to provide some practical insights so we can reflect back and as well as look ahead to what's going to be most important for our businesses going forward. Our first speaker we've got today is Mark Westcott from Rural Succession Solutions, and he's going to provide some practical insights into succession planning, which we know is a very important conversation for families and businesses throughout Australia and New Zealand. Next up we'll have Simon Quilty, who's going to be giving us some insights into what the market looks like next year and what we can expect and how we can set ourselves up for success to take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead. And then we thought we'd end on a highlight and have a look back at the World Angus Youth Competition that took place earlier this year, where we had 48 young people from across the world come together to showcase their leadership, passion for the Angus breed and form some lifelong connections. This highlights reel has kindly been put together from Branded Ag, so we thought we'd end the year on a high, and no better way to do it than look at what the future people are that are coming through in our Angus breed. So we really hope you enjoy this episode and have a great Christmas and New Year break, and we look forward to catching you up around regional Australia and New Zealand next year.
Let me ask you something. What if this Christmas was a year your family finally cleared the fog and got real clarity about the future of the farm? Now, parents, before anyone panics, you don't have to solve anything over Christmas lunch. You don't need a whiteboard next to the esky. You need to start a gentle, honest conversation. And today I want to give you 3 big ideas. Firstly, the real cost of doing nothing. 2, while fair isn't always equal. And 3, how to start the conversation safely without awkward group meetings or anyone blowing up before dessert. Here's something I've learned after 30 years of sitting around kitchen tables, and that is most succession disasters don't come from bad families. They come from good families who just waited too long to get it started. I've seen it over and over. Great people, good-hearted kids, but procrastination quietly attacks from the inside. Let me tell you about this family out west. Lovely people. They'd been meaning to start succession for about 6 or 7 years. Every Christmas they said, yep, we'll sort it next year. Well, next year never came until suddenly it did. And it cost them well over $250,000 in tax and mainly legal fees just to clean up the fallout. But this was the part that people underestimate. Money wasn't the biggest cost. The real cost was a family breakdown. The siblings stopped talking, the grandkids stopped seeing each other and probably never will again. And Christmas went from a full table to just everybody having their separate gatherings. But also compare that to what proper planning actually costs. What we estimate is it's about 0.01% of your assets. Let me repeat that. 0.01% of your assets. So the question for rural mums and dads this Christmas isn't should we do something, it's what's the cost if we leave this for another year? And what's the cost for the family? Because doing nothing is the silent killer of family unity. The second point I want to touch on is fair isn't always equal. So this triggers more tension than politics at Christmas lunch. This whole idea that fair means equal. If every rural family in Australia did equal, we'd have farms sliced into postage stamps by now. And most of the family farms would end up having to be sold off because the kids who end up on the farm couldn't afford to pay out the debt to their other siblings. I met a family once, 3 kids, 2 lived off farm in the city, and one had been running the farm for nearly 2 decades, raising kids on a shoestring and keeping the whole operation alive through droughts, floods, and machinery held together with fencing wire and blind faith. And the city kids said, we just want it to be fair. We want a third each. And you know, the poor kid that was on the farm just about dropped his stubby when they said that to him. But here's the truth. Equal is easy and fair takes courage and wisdom. But fairness is what actually makes it work. What we see is that most children land on one of 3 levels of acceptance when it comes to mum and dad's decisions. And I'm just going to say again, this is always mum and dad's decision. It's not about the children making the rules, it's about mum and dad. But anyway, level 1 is above the line. This is a gratitude, a mindset of thanks mum and dad, This is your life, your estate, it's your life's work, and we respect what decisions you want to make. These are the kids that stay close. They support the plan. They get together at Christmas as mates. Level 2 is others might think, well, it's not perfect, but you know what? It's mum and dad's call. We'll accept it and we'll move forward. But the real issue is level 3, below, what I call below the line. And this is where the trouble brews. These are the words: entitlement, resentment, and selfishness take over. Expectation. I deserve more. It's not fair. This isn't equal. And once that level of entitlement takes hold, nothing mum and dad can do will ever be considered fair. And the whole point of proper planning is to keep as many of the kids as possible above the line. Understanding about gratitude, respect and understanding. Understanding what mum and dad have done on their way through life. Education, experience, all the ways mum and dad help their kids as they're going through life. We're trying to keep the family united and keep the farm in the bloodline for the next generation. The final point, number 3, is how to start the conversation safely. So how do we actually start this conversation without causing tension? Because families do want to talk. They want to know what's going on. They just don't want the blow up that sometimes comes with it. So let's make something very clear. You don't need to have a big group family meeting. In fact, please don't. They're awkward, they shut people down, and someone always feels ganged up on. In our process, which we'll do after Christmas, we never start with a group meeting. We start with one-on-one conversations with every family member first. And the reason is because people open up when they're heard privately and safely, and not with someone who knows the rest of the family and hasn't done that for years. But here are some conversation starters for rural mums and dads. For parents, they just want to make sure we leave clarity, not confusion. They don't have the answers yet, but they can start talking about what the future might look like for everyone. For the children, don't be asking mum and dad for decisions, just get the chance to understand what their thinking is so that you can be supported. And for the rural mums, this is what they're thinking: I just want the kids to stay closer and still get together at Christmas long after we're gone, and I want them to be mates. So maybe now's the time to start the conversation. These lines are safe, soft, and pressure-free. You're not solving anything, you're just opening the door and starting the conversation. But once that door is open, we can guide the whole process from there. So as you carve up the Christmas pudding this year, remember, the real cost of doing nothing is huge, financially, emotionally, and generationally. Fare isn't always equal. It's about gratitude, respect, and keeping the family united. And starting the conversation is simple, especially when everyone is heard one-on-one. And if you want help guiding that conversation or getting a clear, structured plan in place, please reach out. Your family deserves unity, your farm deserves protection, and your legacy deserves to be fortified for generations. I'm Mark Westcott, and I help people create extraordinary legacies. Have a great Christmas and have a great day.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our edition of Paddock to Plate Market Update. I'm Simon Quilty from Global AgriTrends, and today we're going to give you a quick outline of how we're seeing markets and where prices potentially are heading. So, first of all, demand and supply, the equation, and what it means for Australia's Angus cattle. Record prices continue. These are the latest November FAO, Food and Agricultural Organisation, beef prices globally at 147.8. I truly believe this is not the peak, but we're likely to probably see in June, July, August next year higher prices as North America's rebuild gets truly underway, and we see even higher prices in global markets everywhere as US pushes prices higher, both due to their domestic but due to their higher offerings. So currently we're at record beef prices globally, and for that trend to continue into 2026 to peak probably mid to late next year. What has Donald Trump's tariffs meant so far for Australia? Reality is it's not the only country in the world that we've had tariffs. Japan sits at 21.6%, South Korea at 8%, and we did hit a safeguard into China this year at 208,000 in July, and our safeguard meant that we saw a 12% tariff there after July. Indonesia, Taiwan and Canada are all at zero, and we now have really no tariffs into America, so that's now been taken off the top. What we did discover during the whole process of tariffs this year is pluses and minuses. But the key message is that firstly, our key markets have not been pushed into recession. With that, I include Korea, Japan and China. So effectively, they continue to buy our beef and our lamb at very high prices. Should these tariffs have been of a level that mattered, we could have seen them move into recession, but we've avoided that as Donald Trump has lowered those tariffs to around about 15% across most of those key markets. Tariffs have been inflationary and have pushed beef and lamb prices up domestically in America, which has also lifted US global beef offerings around the world. And that's where the advantage, I guess, for Angus is that you're competing head on with US exports, in particular Angus beef. And as a result of higher prices, it's seen higher returns here in Australia. So zero tariffs that were introduced only less than a month ago has, I think, really helped the high quality end of the market, which was probably bearing the brunt of those tariffs. Interestingly, as a result of tariffs, America has not had access into China since March this year, and demand out of China for Australian beef has skyrocketed. The other interesting issue that arose is Brazil had a tariff of close to 76.4% for most of this year on the basis of a 50% tariff plus their regular 26.4% duty once they filled their allocation of 65,000 tonnes. All that means is that today Brazil's tariff also has been reduced. It's dampened without doubt the imported 90CL price, and I think in the short term impacts cow prices in Australia. But I would say as we get into January, February, that we'll start to see momentum again in those cow prices. Japan, Korea and the EU avoid recession at 15%. So very little change in terms of flows, and overall this year I would say that Trump's tariffs has been positive for the Australian beef industry, not a negative. When we look at global markets, you can see that America, up until November for the year, has truly been the standout, 411,570 metric tonnes. So they truly are setting global markets, and they have become our number one export destination, followed by China, Japan and South Korea. But there is no doubt, not only is America paying the top dollar, particularly for Australian loins, tenderloins, strip loins and ribeyes, but also having a major influence on pricing in Japan and South Korea. So overall, expectations next year is that tightening of supplies continue globally. So as we move then into Australia's backfilling role as the US rebuild gets underway. So no surprises, we've seen North America at an 86.7 million number in terms of inventory at a 64-year low. What will be interesting is that in 3 weeks' time, we will get the revised edition for the 2025 number, and the expectation is that it might be up slightly, signifying that there's been a mild commencement in their rebuild. Expect, therefore, as that rebuild continues, the tightening of supply as females are held back. You can see here in terms of beef production in America, it continues to fall on a month-by-month basis. And the net effect is less domestic beef, but also less global beef out of America. And when it comes to cattle pricing, we've had this small correction here in America on the back of really the lack of supply information, but also some of the nuances of the tariffs, where Argentina was given increased access and the lowering of tariffs by Brazil and other countries, which in the short term spooked the market and saw that dip. I expect we will see these prices come back into line with that long-term traditional rebuild pattern that we saw back in 2010 to 15 in America. So more upside in US cattle prices and also in their US beef prices. It augurs very well for Australian Angus prices going forward. Expectation, a peak in around June, July next year. So domestic demand is truly strong in America, and we can see here that the US choice and select cutout, which effectively is, their carcass weight, boneless in terms of individual items, and they have risen over 23% in 9 months. And expectation is next year they continue to rise in this environment, really following some strong seasonal demand with the peak in June, July next year. So as tightness continues into America, the resistance or the resilience of the consumer is extraordinary. And so far, we've yet to see any real pushback as we go forward. There's no doubt post-COVID that the restaurant trade in America has suffered. And you can see the foot traffic and the performance of restaurants are almost near where they were back in 2008 and 9 on the far left during the great financial crisis. So what's happened is they've pivoted away from restaurants and gone into retail, into their supermarkets. And the net effect has been really strong demand through the supermarkets of America today. You can see overall exports out of America into global markets has continued to fall. And in the last 5 years, it's down 26% year on year. And when we look at frozen exports globally, US is down 21% compared to 2022. Everything points to ongoing tightness. And Australia's role in backfilling, we've seen over the last 4 years, Australia's exports to Japan up 17% versus America's exports down 24%. We are backfilling America in key markets with not only volume, but at higher prices. The same holds for Korea, up 24%, compared to America's shipments down 22%, and for China, equally up 16%, and due to that ban back in March, down a whopping 75%. And in the minor markets, you can see across each of those, the EU, the Middle East and Canada, Australia's exports are up substantially and America's are down substantially. Our role in backfilling America is crucial as it leads to higher prices and more demand. And the USDA, United States Department of Ag, are now talking about 400,000 tonnes less global beef exports next year in 2026. So not only is it Australia, I think, that goes into rebuild, but also Brazil and also America. The net effect is, as we backfill America, is more and more demand for grain-fed beef because America's exports are grain-fed. So we've seen in the latest figures for feedlot capacity further growth, now sitting at 1.75 million. And overall, I think that momentum continues at least for the next 2 years, with capacity likely to be at 2 million by the middle of 2027. And with that comes more and more demand for feeder steers. But it's that middle section here of 100 to 199 days on feed that truly the big demand is. with a lot of flatbacks, but also Angus being fed in feedlots, particularly in Northern Australia, in Queensland, and Japan is truly part of this. Korea, China, and North America are all playing crucial roles in where these grain-fed animals are heading. So overall, the situation looks very interesting. In terms of supply and our own rebuild, we've seen poor pasture growth in southern Australia over the last 2 years, up until probably June, July this year. So conditions were appalling, which led, I think, to a fairly sizable liquidation of the southern herd. And as a result, we've seen this female kill ratio, which normally should be around 56.7% for New South Wales, Victoria, WA and South Australia, but it was at a record level of 67.4 and 66.3% over the last 2 quarters. The clear message here is that the southern herd has truly been decimated. And with that, once a rebuild commences, we'll start to see truly strong demand for Australian Angus cattle. And given that the southern herd, so much of it comprises of Angus, 73% content when it comes to females, I think that's where the greatest demand is going to be. So, since then, pasture conditions have improved in both Victoria, South Australia, and you can see though, unfortunately in New South Wales, many parts remain very dry as we speak. But overall, things have improved. So, with that, higher prices, we are starting to move quickly down the path of a rebuild. In Northern Australia, it's been a different situation. Good conditions earlier this year, all the way through to September, October, good pasture growth. And as a result, we've seen that northern herd, I think, in a holding pattern, neither growing nor liquidating. But that was on the back of 9 quarters of expansion back in 21, 22 and early 23. So as we move towards, I think, a rebuild in the south, I think the impact will be felt in the north as well, and they too will move into a rebuild of some sort. So expect tightening supplies aggressively in the south and a bit milder in the north as we move into 2026. I think we see that probably in Q1, if not Q2 of next year. So Australia to move into a rebuild on the back of, I think, some heavy liquidation, particularly in southern Australia. So as we move forward here, the last 3 months in Queensland has been exceptionally good, and now with higher prices, I think that does help trigger a mild rebuild in Northern Australia. So with that, I think we see, the liquidation of the last year, a 9.2 million head slaughtering, falling to 7.8 next year, 6.7 million the following year, and another year of 6.7 million as the rebuild gets underway. These are very different to MLA's numbers, and we all have our difference of opinions, but I simply do not see the numbers that they're claiming. So we'll see how this pans out. So moving forward here then is other cattle cycles when we've had similar types of rebuild. You can see here pricing wise that we are on track with what other, periods of this same rebuild has occurred. And my expectation is next year a fairly sizable shift in pricing to higher levels, with probably by 2027 the peak of the market is reached. So here are my national feeder steer prices. I expect by June, July next year that we're talking closer to a 630 versus today's price of around 485, 490. And dare I say in March, April 2027, a whopping 740, all but briefly. These are big figures, and I think I speak more confidently about 2026 than I do about 2027. But nonetheless, firm prices, I believe, as both strong demand globally exists but also importantly, supply tightens in Australia significantly. And I think the overall impact will see strong prices, but eventually come 28, 29, we move back to what I call the new norm, where I think Angus feeder steer prices will get back to around about a 550, whereas that whopping great price there, I think we're likely to see, on Angus feeder steers getting back, to a $5 to $5.50 as the new norm. And when it comes to the likes of flatbacks, probably more closer to a longer term pricing of around about $4 to $4.50. So, in conclusion, here are some of the key differences in the last year in terms of pricing, population around the world. And what we find is that Australian cattle numbers I expect will fall next year to about 7.8 million, on lambs about 20.6, but yet global prices to move up to 42% higher, and on lamb about 15. Global demand, GDP, looks like it will strengthen next year to 3.1%. And then as we look at the Aussie dollar, probably not far off where we are today at 64.5 cents. Overall conditions are expected to be slightly drier, but hopefully we don't move into another drought conditions. And when we look at global meat prices, overall expectations for beef up 18% and lamb 15%. Global supply is expected to fall by 400 to 450,000 tonnes next year. Population of the the planet continues to rise to 8.25 billion, and expect zero tariffs when it comes to North America again. So in conclusion, today's livestock meat prices are here because of strong demand. Lack of supply is about to take over. Australia's moving into a full rebuild for both cattle and sheep next year. Expect tightening beef and lamb supplies. And with that, I think comes record prices. Grinding meat prices to all move higher. There could be some retail price resistance at some stage in 2026, but nonetheless, I think we still get to these record levels. The Aussie dollar probably to be in the 62 to 68 range, averaging about 64.5. Do we have capacity to kill these numbers going forward? The answer is yes. And with that, I'd like to put my disclaimer there. Thank you for your attendance today. Any questions, feel free to get back to us. Thanks again. Cheers.
You know I'm back, like I never left. Another sprint, another step, another day, another breath. Been chasing dreams, but I never slept. I got a new attitude and a lease on life is a peace of mind. Seeking to find I can sleep when I die. Want a piece of the pie, got the keys to the ride and shit. I'm straight. I'm on my way. Get up my way. I'm running late. What can I say? I heard you died twice. Once when they bury you in the grave, and the second time is the last time that somebody mentions your name. So when I leave here on this earth, did I take more than I gave? Did I look out for the people, or did I do it all for fame? Legend is Exodus, searching for euphoria, trudging through the mud to find the present, no ignoring. I got 20,000 deep off in the street like we some warriors. My mama told me never bow your head. Whoa.
I feel glorious, glorious. Got a chance to start again. I was born for this, born for this. It's who I am. How could I forget? I made it through the darkest part of the night, and now I see the sunrise. Now I feel glorious, glorious. I feel glorious, glorious.
Hi, Merry Christmas, and I hope you have a great break.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone. See you in 2026.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas from everyone at Angus Australia.